Welcome to Unveiling the Darkness, where we bring you chilling, real-life horror stories from people just like you. Today's story comes to us from Michael Lawson, a resident of Scranton, Pennsylvania, who experienced something terrifying that they'll never forget. If you have your own story, something unexplainable, something that still keeps you awake at night, we want to hear from you. Leave a comment below, and we'll send you our email where you can share your experience with us. Your story could be the next one featured on our channel. Now, settle in and prepare yourself for another spine-chilling tale. The Old House. It's strange how things can change your life without any warning. I've never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural, but this experience changed everything for me. It all started a few years ago, back in 2018. I had just moved to this small town in Pennsylvania for work. The company I worked for transferred me, and since I didn't have much going on, I figured why not. I rented this old house on the outskirts of town. It was cheaper than most of the apartments, and I loved the idea of having more space to myself. Plus, it had character. You know, those old houses with creaky floors, high ceilings, and a history behind every wall. The first few weeks were fine. I was busy with work, so I didn't spend a lot of time at home. But whenever I was there, I noticed little things that felt off. The house was always too quiet. I know that sounds strange, but you could be in the middle of the living room, and it would feel like the air was heavier, like someone was watching you, but there was never anyone there. At least I thought there wasn't. The first time I really noticed something was wrong, it was late at night. I had just finished dinner and was getting ready to head to bed. I remember this vividly. I was standing in front of the sink washing dishes, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. It was quick, like a shadow darting across the room behind me. I turned around fast, but nothing was there. My heart raced for a second, but I brushed it off. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Then the noises started. At first it was small things, creaks, bumps in the night. You can chalk that up to an old house settling, right? But this wasn't normal creaking. It felt purposeful. I would hear footsteps when I was the only one home. Sometimes they would come from the attic, but when I'd go check, there was nothing. I even started leaving the light on in the hallway at night because it felt like something was lurking just outside my bedroom door. One night it got worse. It was around 2 a.m. I woke up to this strange scraping sound. It was coming from above me, directly over my bed. My first thought was rats, but it didn't sound like that. It was slower, like something was being dragged across the floor. I lay there listening, trying to figure out what it could be. My heart was pounding in my chest. I told myself it was nothing, but then, suddenly the sound stopped. Dead silence. I tried to calm down, but then I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, but it was there, like someone was talking just outside my bedroom door. I couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakable. Someone or something was there. I got out of bed, heart racing, and grabbed the nearest thing I could find, which happened to be a heavy book. I didn't know what I was expecting to do with it, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing I could defend myself with. I slowly opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The light I had left on was flickering, casting strange shadows along the walls. And there, at the end of the hallway, I saw it. A figure, just standing there staring at me. It was dark, like a silhouette, but its presence was overwhelming. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure didn't move either, just stood there, watching. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like hours. Finally, I managed to slam the door shut and lock it. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I called the landlord and told him what happened. I expected him to laugh it off or say I was imagining things, but instead, he went quiet. He told me something I'll never forget. He said that house had a history. Years ago, a man lived there with his wife. One night he came home drunk and they had an argument. No one knows exactly what happened, but she died. Some say he pushed her down the stairs, others say he strangled her. But the thing is, he never went to prison. The police ruled it an accident, and he continued living there alone. He died in that house a few years later. The locals believed his spirit, and maybe even hers, never left. I moved out the next day. I didn't want to wait around to find out if that shadow was the man, or worse, his wife. To this day, I still get chills thinking about that figure in the hallway. I don't know if it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but I do know one thing: that house. It wasn't just a house. Something was there. And I'm never going back. Our second story today comes from Jessica Moore, who resides in Seattle, Washington. Jessica experienced a series of unsettling events after moving into what seemed like the perfect apartment. What began as strange noises quickly escalated into something far more terrifying. As you listen, remember, if you have a story of your own, feel free to share it with us. Leave a comment and we'll send you our email where you can submit your personal horror experiences. Now let's dive into Jessica's chilling account. The Unseen Visitor. I've always considered myself a rational person. I don't scare easily, and I've never been one to believe in ghosts or anything paranormal. But after what happened to me last year, there are some things I just can't explain away. My name is Jessica Moore, and I've lived in Seattle, Washington for the last 10 years. I moved here for work, and for the most part, it's been a good life. But last year, I went through something that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. It started when I decided to move into a new apartment. My old place was small and cramped, and I wanted something with more space and better lighting. I found this older, 3-story building on the edge of the city. It was charming in a vintage sort of way: high ceilings, wooden floors, and large windows that overlooked the street. The rent was surprisingly cheap, but I didn't think too much about it. The landlord told me the building was old, so they couldn't charge too much. I moved in late February. At first, everything was fine. The apartment was perfect for me: quiet, cozy, and filled with natural light during the day. But after the first couple of weeks, I started noticing things. At night, I'd hear noises. Not the typical old building creaks and groans, but something else. It started with footsteps. At first, I thought it was my upstairs neighbor, but the sound wasn't coming from above, it was coming from the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone was pacing back and forth. I remember the first time I heard them, I got up to check, convinced that someone was outside my door. But when I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. It was empty. The building was quiet. I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks on me and went back to bed. But the footsteps didn't stop. Night after night, I'd hear them, always around the same time, just after midnight. Sometimes they'd be faint, like someone was trying to move quietly, and other times they'd be loud, almost as if someone was stomping. I even asked my upstairs neighbor if they had been moving around late at night, but they said no. In fact, they mentioned they'd been hearing strange noises, too, like furniture being dragged across the floor when no one was home. That gave me a bad feeling, but I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I just shrugged it off. Then, things started getting weirder. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. with this intense feeling of being watched. You know how sometimes you just know someone is looking at you, even if you can't see them? That's what it felt like. I was lying in bed, and the air in the room felt thick, almost suffocating. My heart was racing, but I couldn't figure out why. I glanced toward the doorway, and that's when I saw something standing just outside my bedroom, in the shadows. I froze. It was tall, almost human-shaped, but wrong. It was like a silhouette, darker than the surrounding darkness. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of this figure standing there, watching me. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming, but I was wide awake. I don't know how long I lay there staring at this thing, but eventually I reached over to turn on the lamp next to my bed. As soon as the light flooded the room, the figure was gone. Just like that. I was shaken but convinced it had to be my mind playing tricks on me. I even Googled sleep paralysis to try to explain it, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that. After that night, I started feeling uncomfortable in the apartment, like I was never really alone. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye shadows that shouldn't have been there. Doors would creak open by themselves, lights would flicker, and there was this constant feeling of being watched. I told myself it was just an old building, that maybe there was a draft or faulty wiring, but the unease was growing. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, around midnight, and I was sitting on the couch watching TV. I had the lights dimmed, trying to unwind before bed. Out of nowhere, I heard this loud crash from the kitchen, like something heavy had fallen. My heart skipped a beat. I jumped up and rushed over, expecting to find something knocked over, but everything was exactly where it should be. As I stood there, trying to figure out what had happened, I felt it again, that sensation of being watched. It was so intense, like something was right behind me. Slowly I turned around, and that's when I saw it again. The figure. This time it was standing at the far end of the room near the window. It was clearer now, still dark, still shadowy, but I could almost make out the shape of a head, shoulders, arms. It was just standing there, unmoving, like it was waiting for something. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. My brain was screaming at me to run, but my body wouldn't listen. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at this thing, but then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. Vanished. That was the last straw. I didn't sleep that night. As soon as the sun came up, I packed a bag and left. I called the landlord and told him I couldn't stay there anymore. I didn't even care about breaking the lease, I just needed to get out. When I told the landlord what had been happening, I expected them to laugh or brush it off, but instead they sighed, almost like they had been expecting it. They told me that I wasn't the first tenant to report strange things happening in that apartment. Apparently, years ago, a man had died there alone and undiscovered for weeks. Ever since, people who lived in the unit complained of odd occurrences. Some stayed, some left, but the stories were always the same. I moved out the next day. I haven't been back since, and I don't plan on it. I've tried to make sense of what happened, but there's no logical explanation. All I know is, whatever was in that apartment, it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. Even now, whenever I hear a strange noise in the middle of the night, I can't help but wonder if something followed me.